My name is Sadie Marshall, 27 years old, and I never thought my grandfather's death would unravel our family's darkest secrets. When I received that call about his will reading, I had no idea what awaited me. That morning at the gas station, a disheveled homeless man grabbed my arm. His eyes clear and urgent, he warned, "Don't take that car. They know you're coming." I brushed him off as crazy, but my blood ran cold when I realized he knew my name. If you've ever received a warning that later saved your life, drop a comment below about your experience. Hit like and subscribe to see how this stranger became my unexpected guardian angel in this family nightmare. Growing up, my grandfather Jonathan Marshall was my rock. After my parents' bitter divorce when I was 8, weekends at Grandpa's countryside estate became my sanctuary. While my mother Diana and father Thomas were too busy tearing each other apart over money and property, Grandpa taught me to paint. His sprawling estate had an art studio overlooking the lake where we would spend hours with canvases and watercolors. "Art isn't about perfection, Sadie," he would say, his brush dancing across the canvas. "It's about truth. Always seek the truth in everything you do." Truth was something in short supply between my parents. My mother remarried within a year to Richard Winters, a banking executive with a portfolio as impressive as his ego. Suddenly, the woman who once packed my homemade lunches was hosting charity galas and criticizing my clothing choices. "Appearance is everything now, Sadie," she would lecture while adjusting her tennis bracelet. "We have a position to maintain." My father took the opposite approach, becoming bitter and resentful. He rented a small apartment downtown and filled it with resentment. "Your mother and that suit robbed me blind," became his constant refrain during our awkward weekend visits. "They cheated me out of everything I worked for." Only at Grandpa Jonathan's estate did the world make sense. He never took sides, never spoke ill of either of my parents, but his disappointed sighs when they would call with excuses to skip family gatherings said everything. "Family isn't perfect, little Sadie," he would tell me while teaching me to mix paint colors. "But it's all we have in this world. Remember that." I remembered. Even when I moved to Boston to pursue my art career after college, against both my parents' wishes, my father wanted me to join his insurance business. My mother and Richard thought art was a charming hobby, but not a serious career path for someone with connections. Grandpa Jonathan secretly helped me with the security deposit on my first apartment, a cramped studio in Boston with northern light perfect for painting. For 5 years, I scraped by selling commissioned portraits and working at a coffee shop. My paintings of urban landscapes and everyday people started appearing in small galleries. I was building something authentic, even if my bank account didn't reflect it. Then came the call 2 weeks ago. Grandpa Jonathan, still vibrant at 78, had collapsed in his garden, heart attack. By the time the housekeeper found him, he was gone. The funeral was a tense affair. My mother Diana orchestrated everything like one of her charity events, more concerned with the flower arrangements than her own grief. My father Thomas stood awkwardly with his 20-something girlfriend, checking his watch repeatedly. My cousins Aaron and Lily, from my father's side, at least seemed genuinely sad. We had all spent those magical summers together at Grandpa's estate before adult complications pulled us apart. I thought that would be the end of it. Grandpa would be buried, the estate would be sold, and we would all retreat to our separate corners. Then yesterday, I received a call from Mr. Harrington, Grandpa's attorney. "Your grandfather insisted that all family members be present for the reading of his will," he said in his formal tone. "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the estate." "Is that really necessary?" I asked, thinking of another day with my warring parents. Jonathan was most insistent, Miss Marshall. He left specific instructions that all family members must be present or certain provisions would be invalidated. That was how I found myself packing an overnight bag, dreading the 3-hour drive to my childhood sanctuary that now felt like the setting for an inevitable family explosion. It's just one day, I told myself, looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My red hair was pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under my eyes from nights of crying myself to sleep. Go in, get through it, honor Grandpa, and leave. Little did I know that Grandpa Jonathan had one final lesson to teach us all, and it would begin with a stranger's warning at a gas station. My alarm blared at 6 in the morning. The will reading wasn't until 2 in the afternoon, but I wanted plenty of time for the drive. Boston traffic could be unpredictable, and the last thing I needed was to arrive late and give my mother another reason to lecture me about responsibility. I had arranged an Uber to take me to the rental car place, but as I waited outside my apartment building, my phone pinged with a cancellation notice. Great. Just perfect. Then I remembered. Grandpa's old Buick was still parked in my building's garage. He had left it with me months ago when he came for a visit, claiming Boston parking was too expensive for a rental. Just keep it tuned up for me, Sadie girl, he had said with a wink. I'll get it next time. There wouldn't be a next time now. I hadn't driven the car much, just enough to keep the battery from dying. It was practical in the way Grandpa always was, despite his wealth. A 10-year-old Buick in navy blue, comfortable but not flashy. I grabbed my keys and headed to the garage. The car started smoothly, and seeing the leather steering wheel with the tiny paint stain where I had once accidentally touched it after a lesson brought tears to my eyes. I could almost smell Grandpa's aftershave, the same brand he'd used for 40 years. The gas gauge showed nearly empty, so my first stop would have to be a gas station. I pulled into the Shell just off the highway, stretching as I got out to pump gas. That's when I noticed him. He was standing by the station's convenience store entrance. A tall man with a graying beard and tattered clothes, a cardboard sign leaning against his leg that read "Veteran Needs Help." Nothing unusual for a city gas station, but something about the way he stared directly at me made me uncomfortable. As I finished pumping gas and replaced the nozzle, he approached. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice surprisingly articulate for someone who looked like he'd been living rough. "Are you Sadie Marshall?" I froze. How did this stranger know my name? "Who are you?" I demanded, one hand reaching for my phone in my pocket. "Name's Jackson," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "I knew your grandfather." "That was unexpected. How did you?" "Listen carefully," he interrupted, his eyes darting around the gas station. "Don't take that car to the reading. They know you're coming, and it's not safe." "What are you talking about?" I asked, backing toward the driver's door. "Jonathan was trying to protect you," he continued. "I worked for him. He found out things about your family, things they don't want you to know." This was crazy. A homeless man claiming to work for my millionaire grandfather, claiming my family was somehow dangerous. "I need to go," I said, firmly opening the car door. Jackson nodded, seemingly unsurprised by my reaction. "Just remember, when things get bad today, look in the glove compartment. Jonathan left you the key to everything." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building. My hands were shaking as I started the car. It had to be a coincidence, or a scam. Maybe he had seen my name on some mail in the car when I wasn't looking. Or maybe Grandpa really had been kind to him the way he was kind to everyone. And this man's mental health issues had twisted that kindness into something more significant. As I merged onto the highway, his warning echoed in my mind. "Don't take that car. They know you're coming." The drive should have been peaceful. It was a beautiful early autumn day, trees just beginning to hint at their coming color change. Instead, every mile increased my anxiety. I found myself checking the rearview mirror, constantly half expecting to see someone following me. About halfway to the estate, the Buick made a strange knocking sound. I tensed, slowing down slightly, but the noise didn't repeat. Was something wrong with the car? Was that what Jackson had been warning me about? My phone rang my mother's ringtone. I connected it to the car's Bluetooth. "Sadie, where are you?" Diana's voice filled the car sharp with impatience. "Everyone's already arrived except you." "The reading isn't for another 2 hours, Mom," I replied, checking the clock. "We're having lunch first," Richard arranged it. "It's important to present a united family front before the formal proceedings." I could picture her perfectly standing in Grandpa's kitchen that she had always thought was too outdated, directing staff and checking her watch. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised. "You're not taking public transportation, are you?" The horror in her voice was evident. "No, Mom. I'm driving Grandpa's Buick." There was a pause. "That old thing. Why would you bring that?" "It was convenient," I said, not mentioning the Uber cancellation. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem," she said quickly. "Too quickly. Just hurry up. There are important family matters to discuss before Mr. Harrington arrives." She hung up without saying goodbye, typical Diana style. But something in her reaction to the car bothered me. Why would she care what I drove? The estate came into view as I turned onto the private road. Grandpa's home sat on 20 acres of land, a beautiful colonial-style mansion that had been in the family for 3 generations. As a child, it had seemed magical. Now, as I parked in the circular driveway, it felt like I was entering a battlefield. The grand oak double doors of the estate opened before I could even knock. Margot, my grandfather's housekeeper of 30 years, stood there with reddened eyes and a forced smile. "Miss Sadie," she said warmly, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lemon furniture polish and fresh bread. "It's good to have you home." Home. It hit me that this place, more than any other, had been my true home. And now it would likely be sold, another casualty of my family's fractures. "They're in the dining room," Margot whispered, nodding toward the sound of clinking silverware and tense conversation. "Brace yourself, dear." I took a deep breath and walked through the foyer past the family portraits that chronicled generations of Marshalls. The last one showed Grandpa, my parents, when they were still married, 8-year-old me, missing my front teeth, and my cousins Aaron and Lily. We looked happy. We were happy then. The dining room fell silent as I entered. My mother sat at one end of the long mahogany table, her husband Richard beside her. She wore black, her blonde hair, perfectly styled diamonds glinting at her ears. My father Thomas occupied the other end, his girlfriend Brittany, looking uncomfortable in a dress that was slightly too revealing for a will reading. My cousins Aaron and Lily sat together on one side, both in their 30s now, with their own complicated lives. Finally, my mother said, checking her watch, "We've been waiting for nearly an hour." "The reading isn't until 2, Mom," I reminded her, taking the only empty seat between Aaron and Lily. "We wanted family time first," Richard interjected, his banker's smile, not reaching his eyes, "to align our expectations." "Align our expectations," I repeated. "What does that mean?" My father cleared his throat. "What Richard means is that we should present a united front." Jonathan was unpredictable in his later years. Unpredictable, I felt defensive immediately. Grandpa was sharp as ever the last time I saw him. "When was that exactly?" my mother asked with a pointed look. "You visited him quite often toward the end, didn't you?" There it was, the implication that I had somehow influenced Grandpa for my own benefit. Before I could respond, the dining room doors opened again, and Mr. Harrington entered. He was a tall, thin man, with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually serious expression. "I apologize for the interruption," he said formally, "but I believe the reading was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the library." "We're just having a family lunch first," Harold, my mother, said sweetly. "Mrs. Winters, I must insist we adhere to the schedule Mr. Marshall established. He was very specific about the timing and location." My mother's smile tightened, but she nodded. "Of course. We'll move to the library then." As we all stood, Aaron squeezed my hand under the table. "Good to see you, cuz," he whispered. Aaron had always been the peacemaker, even when we were kids. The library was Grandpa's favorite room floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with everything from first editions to paperback mysteries. His leather chair still sat by the fireplace, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the side table. Mr. Harrington took his position at Grandpa's desk, arranging papers meticulously. We all found seats, an invisible line dividing my mother's side of the family from my father's. "Before we begin," Mr. Harrington said, "I must inform you that Jonathan Marshall made significant changes to his will approximately 1 month before his passing." The tension in the room instantly doubled. "What kind of changes?" Richard demanded. "All will be explained in due course, Mr. Winters." Mr. Harrington's tone made it clear he wouldn't be rushed. Mr. Marshall was of sound mind and fully competent when these changes were made, witnessed by myself and Dr. Reynolds. 1 month ago, my mother's voice rose slightly. "That was right after Sadie's last visit, wasn't it?" All eyes turned to me. "I visited Grandpa for his birthday," I said defensively. "We had dinner and painted together like always." "How convenient," my father muttered. "Thomas," Mr. Harrington warned. "Please allow me to proceed without interruption," Jonathan anticipated. Discord, and left specific instructions. "Of course he did," Richard said with a dismissive wave. Jonathan always did have a flair for the dramatic. Lily, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "Can we please just show some respect? Grandpa Jonathan isn't even cold in his grave, and you're all acting like vultures." The room fell silent. Lily had always been the most like Grandpa, outspoken and principled. "Thank you, Lily," Mr. Harrington said with a nod. "Now shall we begin?" As he adjusted his glasses and opened the formal document, I couldn't help but think of the homeless man's warning. "They know you're coming." What exactly did my family know? And what had Grandpa changed in his will that had them all so on edge? The first revelation came quickly. "To my loyal staff, who have been more family to me than some who share my blood," Mr. Harrington read, "I leave the following bequests." Margot received a generous pension and the guest cottage on the property. The groundskeeper, the chef, even the part-time gardener, all received thoughtful gifts and financial security. My mother's mouth tightened with each bequest to the staff. When Mr. Harrington announced that Grandpa had left $100,000 to the downtown homeless shelter, she couldn't contain herself. "100,000 to vagrants," she hissed to Richard. "He's giving away our inheritance to people who will just drink it away." The homeless shelter. I thought of Jackson at the gas station. Had Grandpa really known him? The coincidence seemed less and less likely. Then came the family heirlooms. The valuable paintings my mother had always coveted went to the local art museum. The antique silver collection she had repeatedly borrowed and never returned was left to Lily. The vintage car collection my father had always hinted should be his went to Aaron. With each bequest, the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. These weren't just sentimental items. They were valuable assets that both my parents had clearly been counting on. And now Mr. Harrington said, "Before I proceed to the main estate and financial holdings, Jonathan requested that you all view a video message he recorded 1 week before his passing." This was unexpected. My mother and father exchanged glances across the room, a rare moment of shared concern. As Mr. Harrington set up the television and video player, I recalled Jackson's words. "Look in the glove compartment." Should I excuse myself and check? Before I could decide, the screen flickered to life, and there was Grandpa Jonathan sitting in this very library looking directly at us. Grandpa Jonathan looked thinner on screen than I remembered, but his eyes were clear and determined. He sat in his favorite leather chair, hands folded in his lap, the family portrait from happier days visible on the wall behind him. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice slightly raspy but strong, "then I've moved on to whatever comes next. Don't be sad for me. I've had a good life, longer than many, and shorter than I'd hoped." He smiled that warm smile that had comforted me through so many childhood troubles. "I've made changes to my will recently, as Harold will have told you. These changes weren't made lightly or in haste. They were made with careful consideration after certain discoveries." Grandpa leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. "For years I've watched this family fracture. I've seen greed and bitterness replace love and respect. I blamed myself for not doing more to heal these wounds. But recently I discovered that the rot goes deeper than I realized." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My father suddenly seemed very interested in his shoes. Diana, Grandpa addressed my mother directly, causing her to flinch. "You and Richard have been systematically removing valuable items from this house for the past year. The security cameras I had installed after the first missing painting caught you taking the Remington bronze last month." My mother gasped. Richard put a steadying hand on her arm, his face expressionless. Thomas, Grandpa, continued, turning his attention to my father. "The business account discrepancies weren't accounting errors. I have copies of checks with my forged signature made out to gambling establishments. Did you think I wouldn't notice $300,000 missing?" My father's face drained of color. His girlfriend Brittany stared at him in shock. Aaron and Lily, Grandpa's voice softened slightly. "You've been caught in the middle of your parents' war for too long. I've tried to protect you from it, perhaps to your detriment." My cousins exchanged glances, confusion evident in their expressions. And Sadie, Grandpa's eyes seemed to find me through the screen. My artistic Sadie, who sees the truth but sometimes lacks the courage to speak it. "You've known something was wrong in this family for years, but chose the path of least resistance. I understand why, but it's time for that to change." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. He was right. I had avoided confrontation, visited when I knew others wouldn't be there, kept my head down and my opinions to myself. "What I've discovered about this family has broken my heart," Grandpa continued. "But I still believe there's hope for redemption. That's why I've structured my will as I have. It's not about punishment, though it may feel that way to some of you. It's about truth and consequences." He took a deep breath, seeming to gather his strength. "The bulk of my estate, including this house and my business holdings, will not be divided equally, as you might have expected. Instead, I've created a specific arrangement that Harold will explain after this video." Grandpa leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 78 years. "One final thing. The key to understanding everything is in the Buick. Sadie knows which one." The video ended abruptly, freezing on Grandpa's solemn face before going black. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, like a dam-breaking chaos, erupted. "What Remington bronze is he talking about, my father?" demanded, standing up and pointing at my mother. "How dare you forge checks from the family business?" she shrieked back. Richard was on his phone, presumably calling their lawyer. Brittany was edging toward the door, clearly regretting her presence at this family implosion. Aaron tried to restore order. "Everyone, please, this isn't helping anything." But it was my mother who turned the full force of her fury on me. "What did he mean? The key is in the Buick," she demanded, advancing toward me. "What did you do, Sadie? How long have you been planning this?" Planning what I stood my ground, though my heart was racing. I had no idea about any of this. "You were always his favorite," my father joined in, his face flushed with anger or shame. I couldn't tell which. "Always the artistic one, the special one. Did you convince him to change his will?" "I would never do that." "Then what's in the car?" Richard's cold voice cut through the shouting. Jonathan specifically mentioned it. I remembered Jackson's warning at the gas station. "Don't take that car. They know you're coming." "I don't know what's in the car," I said truthfully, "but I'm going to find out." I turned to leave the library, and to my alarm everyone followed. My mother and Richard close behind my father, not far behind them Aaron and Lily trailing uncertainly, and Mr. Harrington calling for order that no one heeded. We spilled out onto the circular driveway, where the Buick sat, afternoon sun glinting off its navy paint. I reached the car first, yanking open the driver's door and lunging for the glove compartment. Inside was a single USB drive, with a handwritten label, "The Truth." "Give that to me," my mother demanded, reaching for it. I clutched it tightly. "Number Grandpa wanted me to find this." "Miss Marshall is correct." Mr. Harrington had finally caught up, slightly out of breath. "The will specifically states that any items found in the vehicle are Sadie's property exclusively." "This is ridiculous," Richard seethed. Jonathan was clearly not in his right mind. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Winters." The new voice came from the direction of the estate gates. We all turned to see a car pulling up, and to my absolute shock, Jackson stepped out. But this wasn't the homeless man from the gas station. This Jackson wore a clean suit. His beard neatly trimmed his bearing, confident and professional. Beside him was a uniformed security guard I didn't recognize. "Who the hell are you?" my father demanded. "Jackson Miller," he replied calmly, approaching our stunned group. Jonathan Marshall's head of security for the past year, and before that, his business partner for 20 years. My mother's face went deathly pale. She swayed slightly, Richard quickly supporting her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Jackson Miller died in a boating accident 3 years ago." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Jackson said with a grim smile, "and very convenient for certain family members who thought I wouldn't notice funds being diverted from our joint ventures." My father took an involuntary step backward. "I don't understand," I said, looking between Jackson and my shaken family. "You were homeless this morning." "Not homeless," Jackson corrected. "Undercover. Your grandfather and I staged my death when we began to suspect someone was embezzling from the company. I've been watching your family for months, gathering evidence." "Evidence of what?" Aaron asked, looking as confused as I felt. "Theft, fraud, forgery," Jackson listed dispassionately. "All documented on that USB drive Sadie is holding, along with video confessions from various accomplices who were quite willing to talk when offered immunity." My mother suddenly collapsed against Richard, who eased her to sit on the mansion's front steps. My father looked like he might be sick. "Jonathan wanted to handle this privately within the family," Jackson continued. "He believed in second chances. The changes to his will reflect that belief." Mr. Harrington nodded solemnly. "Indeed. If we could all return to the library, I can explain the full terms now that Mr. Miller has arrived." As we all turned to go back inside, Jackson fell into step beside me. "I'm sorry about the scare at the gas station," he said quietly. "Jonathan wanted me to warn you, but we weren't sure if your parents might have someone watching the house." "Why me?" I asked, still clutching the USB drive. "Why did Grandpa involve me in this?" Jackson's expression softened. "Because you were the only one he still trusted completely." Back in the library, the atmosphere had transformed. The earlier combative energy had been replaced by a heavy, dread-filled silence. My mother sat rigidly beside Richard, her face fixed in a frozen smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father kept his gaze on the floor, occasionally shooting venomous glances at Jackson. Even Lily and Aaron seemed subdued, the reality of our family's corruption sinking in. Mr. Harrington connected the USB drive to Grandpa's laptop, which was projected onto the large screen where we had just watched Grandpa's message. Jackson stood near the door, arms crossed like a sentinel, ensuring no one would leave. "Before I display these files," Mr. Harrington said gravely, "I want to be clear that Jonathan's wish was for family reconciliation, not legal prosecution. However, if the terms of the will are not accepted by all parties, these documents will be submitted to the proper authorities. In other words, cooperate or face criminal charges." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. The first file was a series of security camera videos. The timestamps showed various dates over the past year. My mother and Richard entering rooms with empty bags and leaving with them full. Close-ups of artwork and antiques that were now conspicuously absent from the mansion. 15 items in total, Jackson narrated dispassionately. Market value of approximately $2 million. "We were just moving them for safekeeping," my mother protested weakly. Jonathan was getting forgetful. "To your vacation home in the Hamptons," Jackson raised an eyebrow, "where 3 items have already been sold to private collectors." My mother fell silent. The next files were financial records. Check images with Grandpa's signature that even I could tell had been forged. Bank statements showing large withdrawals, casino receipts. "The gambling started after the divorce," my father said, his voice hollow. "I was going to pay it all back." "With what money?" Thomas Jackson asked. "You've been living beyond your means for years." More documents appeared on screen. Emails between my parents discussing how to accelerate inheritance plans. Consultations with shady doctors about having Grandpa declared incompetent. With each revelation, I felt physically ill. These were my parents, the people who had raised me, plotting to steal from the man who had shown us all nothing but generosity and love. "Stop," I finally said, standing up. "I get it. They did terrible things. But what does this have to do with me? Why drag me into this?" Mr. Harrington nodded, as if he'd been waiting for this question. "Because, Miss Marshall, your grandfather's final wishes center around you." He switched to a new document on the screen, Grandpa's will. The estate in its entirety, including the family business Marshall Innovations, is to be held in trust, with Sadie Marshall and Jackson Miller serving as co-trustees, Mr. Harrington read formally. Gasps filled the room. My mother made a strangled sound. "This can't be legal," Richard protested. "Jonathan wasn't of sound mind." "I assure you he was," Mr. Harrington replied calmly. "As his physician attorney and 2 independent psychiatrists will testify if needed." "Co-trustees," I repeated, trying to understand. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Sadie Jackson explained, "that you and I will run the company together and manage the estate. You'll receive a generous salary, and the profits will be used according to Jonathan's instructions." "Which are my father?" asked, a desperate edge to his voice. Mr. Harrington adjusted his glasses. 50% of all profits will be reinvested in the business. 25% will go to charitable causes. Jonathan outlined primarily arts education and homeless services. The remaining 25% will be distributed to family members who complete certain requirements. Requirements? My mother echoed faintly. Rehabilitation, in your case, Diana, Mr. Harrington said, without emotion. Return of all stolen items, therapy and community service. For Thomas, gambling addiction treatment, repayment of stolen funds and vocational training. This is absurd. Richard stood up, pulling my mother with him. We won't stand for this manipulation from beyond the grave. We'll contest the will. You're welcome to try, Jackson said mildly. But the evidence goes to the district attorney if you do. Jonathan was very clear about that provision. Richard's face contorted with fury, but he remained silent. Why did Grandpa set it up this way? I asked. Still struggling to process everything. Why not just report them to the police? Because despite everything, Jackson said gently, he loved his family. He believed people could change if given the right motivation and support. This arrangement gives everyone a chance to make amends and rebuild. I looked at my parents, these strangers I'd known all my life. Had Grandpa been right? Could they change? Did they deserve the chance? There's something else you should know, Sadie Jackson continued. Those anonymous purchases of your artwork over the past 3 years, that was Jonathan. He was so proud of your talent, your integrity. He said you were the only one who inherited the true martial spirit. Tears filled my eyes. Grandpa had been my secret supporter all along, believing in me when even I had doubts. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, looking around at my fractured family. I'm not a businesswoman. I'm an artist. That's exactly why Jonathan chose you, Jackson said. You see truth and beauty where others see only profit margins. He trusted your heart. Aaron finally spoke up. For what it's worth, Sadie, I think Grandpa made the right choice. This family needs healing, not more division. Lily nodded in agreement. I'll help however I can. My parents remained silent, the weight of their exposed actions crushing any objections they might have made. Miss Marshall, Mr. Harrington, said formally, Do you accept the responsibilities outlined in your grandfather's will? I thought of Grandpa's words on the video. My artistic Sadie, who sees the truth, but sometimes lacks the courage to speak it. Not anymore. I accept, I said firmly, on one condition. And that is? Mr. Harrington asked. I turned to face my family directly. Complete honesty from this moment forward. No more secrets, no more schemes. If we're going to heal this family, it starts with truth. For the first time since Jackson had arrived, my mother met my eyes. Something passed between us, some small acknowledgement that things had gone terribly wrong, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path back. The truth, she whispered, almost to herself. I'm not sure I even remember what that is anymore. Then it's time to rediscover it, I said, with more confidence than I felt together. The next few hours were among the most difficult of my life. With Jackson and Mr. Harrington's guidance, we began the painful process of untangling the web of lies and thefts that had ensnared our family. My mother and Richard initially tried to minimize their actions, claiming they had only borrowed items they felt were rightfully Diana's inheritance anyway. But when faced with the detailed inventory Jackson produced, complete with photographs and appraisal values, their excuses crumbled. We can return most of them, my mother finally admitted, her carefully maintained facade cracking. Except the Tiffany lamp and the silver service set. Those were sold. To whom, Jackson asked, making notes. Richard named a high-end antique dealer in New York, known for not asking too many questions about provenance. My father's confession was even more difficult to witness. The gambling had started small after the divorce, a way to numb the pain of losing both his wife and half his assets. But it had spiraled out of control, leading to increasingly desperate measures. I convinced myself I was just taking what should have been mine anyway, he said, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Dad always favored Diana's side of the family in business matters. I told myself I was just evening the score. That's not true, Thomas Jackson interjected. Jonathan gave you multiple chances to take a larger role in the company. You turned them down. Because I didn't want his charity, my father exploded years of resentment bubbling to the surface. I wanted to be seen as capable, not the family screw-up who needed Dad's help. So instead, you became the family screw-up who stole from him, Lily said bluntly. That worked out great. Brittany had quietly slipped away during these confessions, murmuring something about family matters and calling a cab. No one tried to stop her. Aaron, always the mediator, suggested we take a break. We're all exhausted and emotional. Maybe we should continue this tomorrow. There's one more thing we need to address today, Jackson said firmly. The paintings. My head snapped up. What paintings? Jackson turned to my mother. Diana, would you like to explain, or shall I? My mother's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about. The missing paintings from Sadie's first gallery showing, Jackson said, his voice hardening. 3 sold to anonymous buyers who never picked them up. The gallery owner was quite confused when they were never claimed. A cold feeling spread through my chest. 3 of my paintings had mysteriously sold at my first small gallery showing 2 years ago. I had been ecstatic, taking it as validation of my work. The gallery had paid me, saying the buyers wished to remain anonymous but would collect the works later. They never did. Mom, I asked, a terrible suspicion forming, did you buy my paintings just to make me think I had sold something? It wasn't like that, she protested weakly. I was trying to help. By lying to me. By making me think strangers valued my work when it was just my mother's pity purchase. I didn't want you to give up, she said, tears finally breaking through her perfect composure. You were struggling so much, and I just wanted to give you some hope. Even your support was a manipulation, I whispered, the betrayal cutting deep. Was anything in our relationship ever real? The room fell silent. My mother looked smaller somehow, her expensive clothes and jewelry unable to disguise the moral bankruptcy beneath. I think we've covered enough for today, Mr. Harrington said gently. The staff has prepared rooms for everyone. We can reconvene in the morning to discuss practical next steps. As the others filed out, I remained seated trying to process the day's revelations. Jackson stayed behind. Your grandfather knew this would be difficult, he said after a moment. He considered many different approaches. Why? This elaborate scheme, I asked. The fake death, the undercover investigation, the will conditions. Why not just confront them directly? Jackson sighed heavily. We tried that first. About a year ago, Jonathan called a family meeting much like this one. He laid out some of his suspicions, asked for explanations. Everyone denied everything, accused him of becoming paranoid in his old age. So he had to prove it, I realized. Yes, and he wanted to create a structure that would force accountability while still preserving the family he loved. Jonathan was a remarkable man. I still don't understand why he chose me, I admitted. I'm not equipped for this. He chose you precisely because you're not like them, Jackson said simply. You create rather than take. You see value beyond monetary worth. And most importantly, you were the only one who visited him regularly without asking for anything. I thought about my visits to Grandpa, our painting sessions, our long talks about art and life. While my parents had been scheming to get their hands on his wealth, I had simply been cherishing time with him, never imagining it would end so soon or so dramatically. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you decide," Jackson replied. "The structure is in place, but how strictly we enforce the conditions is largely up to you as co-trustee. Jonathan trusted your judgment." "And if I don't think they deserve a second chance?" Jackson looked thoughtful. "Then the evidence goes to the authorities, and the family portion of the profits goes to charity instead. It was always meant to be your call, Sadie. Jonathan just wanted you to have all the facts first." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the estate that was now partially my responsibility. The garden where Grandpa had taught me to see the subtle colors in seemingly plain green leaves. The path to the lake where we'd skipped stones and talked about dreams. The studio where I'd first discovered my love of painting. "I need some time to think," I said finally. Jackson nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll handle things here." As I turned to leave, he added, "Your grandfather had a saying, 'Money reveals character, it doesn't create it.' Remember that when you're making your decision." I nodded and headed upstairs to my childhood bedroom, my mind swirling with revelations and responsibilities I'd never asked for but couldn't escape. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated art gallery on the first floor of the Marshall Innovations headquarters in downtown Boston. Once a stodgy corporate reception area, it now showcased emerging artists with a special section dedicated to works created by residents of the homeless shelter Grandpa had supported. "The lighting is perfect," Jackson commented, coming to stand beside me. "Jonathan would have loved this space." I nodded, feeling Grandpa's presence strongly today. It's hard to believe how much has changed in half a year. And it truly was. After that fateful will reading, I had taken 2 weeks to myself hiking the Appalachian Trail and thinking deeply about what kind of legacy I wanted to build on Grandpa's foundation. In the end, I had chosen reconciliation with conditions. My parents were given the chance to make amends, but with strict oversight and real consequences. My mother and Richard had initially threatened legal action, but backed down when faced with the mountain of evidence. 3 months of intensive therapy had revealed issues stemming from my mother's own childhood poverty and insecurity, manifesting as an insatiable need for status and possessions. It wasn't an excuse, but it was at least an explanation. She had returned the stolen items, paid restitution for those sold, and was now surprisingly thriving in her court-mandated community service at an arts program for underprivileged children. Something about teaching kids to see beauty in unexpected places had awakened a part of her I'd never seen before. My father's journey was rockier. He had relapsed, once gambling away his monthly allowance in a weekend of self-destruction, but instead of covering it up, he had called me directly confessing and asking for help. Now, 4 months sober, he was slowly rebuilding his life, working as a sales consultant for a friend's company and attending daily support meetings. "The quarterly reports are ready for review," Jackson said, bringing me back to the present. "The trust is performing beyond projections." "That's good," I said, still sometimes surprised by my new role as co-trustee. I had kept my studio in Boston and still painted regularly, but 3 days a week were now dedicated to learning the business from Jackson and implementing the community initiatives Grandpa had outlined. "And we've had an application for family funds that needs your approval," Jackson added, a slight smile playing at his lips. "From who?" I asked, curious. Aaron had declined his portion, saying he was doing fine on his own. Lily had used hers to finish her doctoral program. My parents were still in the probationary period. "Your mother. She wants to start an art therapy program at the community center. Submitted a full business plan, budget projections, everything by the book. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Surprise, skepticism, but also a flicker of hope. "Do you think it's genuine?" I asked. Jackson had become not just a business partner, but a trusted friend and advisor over these months. "I think it's worth finding out," he replied thoughtfully. "People can change when they're given the right motivation and structure." Jonathan believed that until the end. The grand opening reception would start in an hour. My first major initiative as co-trustee of the Marshall estate, a public commitment to supporting the arts and giving back to the community that had shaped my grandfather's values. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from my mother, on my way, bringing homemade cookies for the shelter kids. "Proud of you today." Simple words that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. "You know," I said to Jackson as we did a final walkthrough of the gallery, "when you stopped me at that gas station, I thought you were crazy. But you were trying to protect me from walking into a family ambush without knowing the truth." Jonathan worried they might try to manipulate you before the will reading, Jackson explained. "He wanted you to be prepared." "I never imagined Grandpa could be so strategic," I admitted. "He always seemed so straightforward." "He was straightforward about what mattered," Jackson corrected. "Values, integrity, love. The strategy was just to protect those things when they were threatened." I paused. Before a painting I'd completed recently, a portrait of Grandpa in his garden face, turned toward the sun, peaceful and wise. It would hang permanently in the gallery entrance. "The greatest inheritance he left wasn't the money or the business," I said softly. "It was the lesson that true wealth comes from creating rather than taking, from healing rather than hurting." Jackson nodded. "That's why he chose you as his legacy bearer. You understood what really mattered to him." As guests began to arrive for the opening, I greeted each one personally, including my slowly healing family members. The homeless shelter residents, whose artwork we were featuring, stood proud beside their creations. Jackson worked the room with surprising charm for a former dead man. Later, as I prepared to give my opening remarks, I thought about the journey from that gas station warning to this moment of possibility and renewal. Grandpa had seen the truth of our family's fractures, and instead of giving up, had architected a path toward healing that demanded accountability while offering redemption. The true inheritance wasn't what we received, but what we did with it. Not the wealth itself, but the wisdom to use it well. Not the power to control others, but the strength to help them change. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the gathered crowd of family, friends, artists, and community members. My grandfather, Jonathan Marshall, believed that every person has the capacity for both destruction and creation. I began. He believed that when we face our darkest truths honestly, we find the light to transform them. This gallery is dedicated to that transformation, to the beauty that can emerge from brokenness when we choose to create rather than destroy. I saw my mother dabbing at her eyes in the front row, my father standing awkwardly but attentively beside her. Not perfect, not fully healed, but trying. Sometimes that's the best any of us can do. Before you explore the gallery tonight, I want to ask you a question. What warnings have you ignored in your life that later proved to be valuable? What truths are you avoiding that might actually set you free if embraced? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you all for being part of this journey of truth and transformation. As applause filled the room, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. His final gift hadn't been the inheritance or even the truth about my family. It had been the courage to face that truth and use it not for revenge, but for healing. To see people not just as they were, but as they could be. To offer second chances while demanding accountability. Some warnings come in unusual packages from unexpected messengers. The wisdom lies in recognizing when to heed them, when to look deeper, and when to use what we discover to build something better than what came before.